You? Fly stealth? Don't make us laugh. Laughter erupted in the briefing room as young pilots slapped each other's backs in mockery. The small woman sat quietly in the back, calmly responding, "I can fly stealth." Laughter echoed throughout the room. Hours later, radar screens blazed with warnings. 15 enemy fighters approaching fast. A single F-16 silently climbed into the sky, then vanished from radar screens. Radio crackled with a female voice. "Target locked! Engaging now!" Everyone fell silent. Reina Vasquez was 28 years old, with a slender frame, long brown hair, and bright eyes that usually remained silent in crowds. At the Air Force Base, Reina was famous for failing advanced flight school. Others regularly mocked her. She doesn't have the physical qualifications. F-16s aren't toys for weak women. She should stick to ground operations where she belongs. During a strategic planning meeting, when everyone was discussing the stealth capabilities of F-35s, Reina quietly spoke up, "I can fly stealth." The room fell silent for 1 second, then erupted in thunderous laughter. An officer sneered, "Even saying that is a joke." Reina didn't argue back, simply saying quietly, "Wait until you see the sky." After the meeting, everyone became even more convinced she was delusional. A maintenance technician later recalled, "I once saw her adjusting radar and sensors on an old F-16. Her hands moved like she'd done it hundreds of times before. I started to suspect she might know more than she was letting on." What her colleagues didn't understand was that Reina's supposed failure at advanced flight school was part of a carefully constructed cover story. She had actually graduated from a program so classified that most people didn't even know it existed. While other pilots learned conventional tactics, she had been trained in experimental techniques that pushed the boundaries of what traditional aircraft could accomplish. Her quiet demeanor wasn't the result of lacking confidence. It was the habit of someone who had been trained to keep secrets that could affect national security if revealed. The mockery she endured was easier to bear than explaining that she possessed skills most pilots couldn't comprehend, developed through training programs that officially didn't exist. Every day she watched F-35s and other advanced aircraft take off, knowing that in the right hands, older aircraft could accomplish missions that the newer planes couldn't handle. But explaining that would require revealing classified capabilities that she had sworn to protect. So she accepted their ridicule, worked on routine maintenance tasks, and waited for the moment when her unique skills might be needed. She knew that combat situations had a way of revealing truth that training exercises couldn't demonstrate. When lives were at stake and conventional tactics failed, innovation and expertise became more valuable than the newest technology. Her fellow pilots saw her as someone who had washed out of programs she wasn't qualified for. They assumed her claims about capabilities were compensating for obvious inadequacies. They had no idea they were dismissing someone whose training had cost the military more resources than most pilots would see in their entire careers. Someone who had mastered techniques that could turn ordinary aircraft into weapons systems that defied conventional understanding of aerial combat. The day when that knowledge would prove its worth was approaching faster than anyone expected. The base's radar system suddenly lit up with warning signals. 15 enemy fighters were approaching the border at high speed. Pilots throughout the base scrambled to assess the threat. "There are too many of them. We don't have enough force to intercept. The F-35s aren't deployed yet. We're going to get destroyed." The base commander ordered preparation for evacuation. As conventional wisdom suggested, the defending force was hopelessly outnumbered. While chaos erupted in the command center, Reina quietly walked toward the flight line. She climbed into a silver F-16 that had been dismissed as obsolete by the younger pilots. A maintenance technician called out in alarm, "Radar will detect you immediately. You won't survive." Reina simply replied, "Not if I fly it right." The F-16 accelerated down the runway and climbed rapidly into the sky. But when the base's radar system swept the area, her signal disappeared. A radar operator shouted, "Impossible! She's flying that F-16 like it's stealth." The young pilots who had been laughing at her hours earlier stood in stunned silence, remembering their mockery from the afternoon briefing. What they were witnessing defied everything they thought they knew about radar signatures and aircraft capabilities. A maintenance technician later recalled, "We completely lost her signal. The only thing we could hear was her calm voice over the radio. Target locked." For the first time, I believe she really was different. In the air, Reyna was implementing techniques that had taken years to master. She wasn't flying a stealth aircraft, she was flying an ordinary F-16 using methods that made it effectively invisible to conventional radar systems. Her approach involved precise control of altitude, speed, and attack angles that exploited weaknesses in radar coverage. Combined with electronic countermeasures and flight patterns designed to confuse tracking systems, she had effectively turned a traditional fighter into a ghost. The enemy squadron was expecting to face a conventional defensive response. Instead, they were being stalked by an aircraft they couldn't detect, piloted by someone who understood their tactical assumptions better than they understood them themselves. Reyna positioned herself above and behind the enemy formation, taking advantage of radar shadows and blind spots that most pilots didn't even know existed. Her first missile strike eliminated the enemy's lead aircraft before they even knew they were under attack. The remaining enemy pilots scattered in confusion, trying to locate a threat they couldn't see on their instruments. Radio transmissions from the enemy squadron filled with panic. "Where is she? We can't get a lock!" Reyna continued her methodical attack, using hit-and-run tactics that kept her invisible while systematically reducing the enemy's numbers. Each engagement lasted only seconds before she disappeared again, repositioning for the next strike. On the ground, the base's radar operators watched in amazement as enemy aircraft disappeared from their screens one by one, while their own pilot remained completely invisible. "She's fighting 15 aircraft and they can't even find her," a young pilot whispered in disbelief. The engagement that military doctrine said was unwinnable was being won by techniques that weren't supposed to exist, executed by a pilot whose capabilities had been dismissed as fantasy. Within 20 minutes, the sky was clear. 15 enemy fighters had been eliminated by a single F-16 that had appeared and disappeared like a ghost. The impossible had become reality, witnessed by everyone who had previously questioned whether such tactics could even work. As the last enemy aircraft fell from the sky, radio transmissions filled with amazement and disbelief. Splash 1, splash 2. On radar screens throughout the base, red dots representing enemy aircraft disappeared one by one. Ground personnel watched in stunned silence as a single F-16 accomplished what an entire squadron was supposed to handle. Within 20 minutes, the entire enemy formation had been eliminated. When the battle ended, soldiers on the ground erupted in celebration. "She saved us all!" An intelligence officer suddenly spoke up. "It's her, Ghost Falcon." The truth began emerging piece by piece. Reyna had been part of a highly classified program called Ghost Falcon Project, an experimental initiative that taught select pilots to make conventional aircraft effectively invisible using advanced tactics and technology integration. The program had developed techniques that allowed skilled pilots to exploit radar limitations, electronic warfare capabilities, and atmospheric conditions to achieve near-stealth performance with unmodified aircraft. After the program was discontinued following a fatal training accident, Reyna had chosen to remain silent, living as a failed flight school cadet rather than revealing her extraordinary capabilities. Now the truth was undeniable to everyone who had witnessed her performance. A veteran pilot whispered, "I've seen the way she handles flight patterns and altitude control. That wasn't luck. Those are skills that only a few people in the world have ever learned. And now, she just saved our entire base." The Ghost Falcon project had been so classified that even senior officers hadn't known about its existence. The techniques Reyna demonstrated weren't just advanced. They represented a completely different approach to air combat that challenged fundamental assumptions about aircraft capabilities. Military analysts who reviewed the engagement recordings couldn't explain how a single conventional fighter had achieved such results against overwhelming odds. "She's not just flying an F-16, an engineer observed. She's turning it into something we didn't know was possible." The young pilots who had mocked her claims about stealth capabilities now understood they had been witnessing something beyond their comprehension. Her quiet confidence hadn't been delusion. It had been the certainty of someone who possessed knowledge that others couldn't imagine. The maintenance technician who had watched her work on radar systems realized that her modifications hadn't been random tinkering. She had been preparing her aircraft for exactly this kind of mission. Every adjustment she made had a purpose, he explained to investigators. She knew exactly what she was doing because she'd done it before. Senior officers began reviewing classified archives, trying to understand how someone with such extraordinary capabilities had been relegated to routine duties. What they discovered was a deliberate cover story designed to protect operational security. Reyna's failure at flight school had been manufactured to explain why someone with her background was present at the base without revealing the classified programs she represented. A former instructor from the Ghost Falcon project, brought in to verify Reyna's account, confirmed what everyone had witnessed. "Those techniques take years to master. She's one of maybe 5 people alive who can execute them under combat conditions." The implications were staggering. The military had been utilizing one of its most valuable strategic assets for routine maintenance tasks while fielding conventional pilots for missions where her unique skills could have been decisive. The enemy squadron that had been eliminated represented a significant threat that conventional tactics would have struggled to counter. Their defeat by a single pilot using experimental techniques demonstrated capabilities that could change the strategic balance of future conflicts. But perhaps most importantly, Reyna's success proved that innovation and expertise could overcome technological disadvantages. Her obsolete F-16 had outperformed aircraft designed specifically for the missions she had accomplished. She didn't just win an engagement, a strategic analyst noted. She demonstrated that individual skill can transcend equipment limitations in ways we didn't think were possible. The question now was whether the military would continue to waste such exceptional capabilities or whether the night's events would lead to a fundamental reassessment of how unconventional skills could be integrated into modern operations. For Reyna, the revelation meant the end of her carefully maintained anonymity. But it also meant the validation of techniques and knowledge that she had been forced to keep secret for too long. Reyna's F-16 touched down on the runway, smoke trailing from its engines, the fuselage marked with bullet holes from the engagement. The entire base's pilot complement stood waiting, their previous laughter replaced by silence and respect. The officer who had mocked her the day before approached with his head down, speaking quietly. "Commander, I'm sorry." Reyna said nothing, simply removing her flight helmet and walking away. That night in the mess hall, the chair next to her remained empty. There were no victory celebrations, no fanfare or ceremonies. Just a heavy silence that spoke louder than any words could express. A young pilot who had been among the loudest mockers approached her table. "Ma'am, would you be willing to teach us? About tactics? About what you did up there?" Reyna considered the request carefully. "What I do isn't something that can be taught in a classroom. It takes years to develop, and it requires capabilities that most pilots will never possess. But could you try? Could you at least show us the principles?" That week, Reyna found herself in a briefing room with pilots who had previously dismissed her as delusional. But now they listened with the attention of students who had seen the impossible become reality. She began sharing concepts about radar evasion, electronic warfare integration, and flight patterns that exploited atmospheric conditions, not the classified techniques themselves, but the theoretical foundations that made such tactics possible. The base commander, observing from the back of the room, made notes about requesting Reyna's reassignment to tactical instruction roles, where her unique knowledge could be properly utilized. "The military has been underutilizing you," he told her after the session. "We need to find better ways to integrate your capabilities." Reyna nodded but remained cautious. Some knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands. Not everyone should have access to these techniques. "But the right people should," he replied. "And we need your judgment to determine who those people are." For the first time since the Ghost Falcon project had ended, Reyna began to consider that her skills might serve a purpose beyond personal survival. Maybe there was a way to share her knowledge responsibly, training select pilots in techniques that could provide strategic advantages without compromising operational security. Maybe the night's victory wasn't just about proving her capabilities. It was about opening possibilities for applications she hadn't considered. The question was whether she was ready to step out of the shadows completely. People once laughed when a small woman said, "I can fly stealth." But that night, Sky proved every laugh was wrong. Reyna didn't need titles or verbal proof. 15 enemy fighters falling from the sky was answer enough. The lesson is clear. Never mock someone just because they dare to say, "I can do this." They might be capable of things you've never dared to imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary capabilities are hidden behind the most ordinary appearances. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses as delusional is actually operating with knowledge that exceeds conventional understanding. Innovation often looks impossible until someone demonstrates that it works. Expertise often appears as confidence that others mistake for arrogance or delusion. The most dangerous mistake is assuming that what you don't understand can't be real. If you believe that quiet heroes deserve to be remembered, leave a dot in the comments, and subscribe to SN Quiet Stories to hear more tales like this.